Welcome to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast, a podcast that brings personal stories from transplant survivors, their families, friends, and loved ones. This is where you will hear challenges and triumphs of everyone involved in this journey. Our guests will offer wisdom, advice, and inspiration on everything you want to know about transplant. My name is Jenny McFarland. I am a transplant survivor, and this is a podcast I wish I had before and immediately following my transplant. Thank you for listening. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast. This is Jenny McFarland, and today's episode we are picking right up where we left off with Nancy Lewis, who was right in the middle of her transplant journey story. First, I just want to remind you all to please leave a rating and review, and visit the website at www.pretoposttx.com, and you can leave any suggestions or reach out to me to be on the show or leave any comments. So I don't want to waste too much more time, but I do want to just mention, if you live in the Houston area, the Pre to Post Transplant Foundation is having its annual Transplant Social on February 10th, which is a Saturday. And it's going to be a great day with lots of fun things to do, lots of transplant speakers coming up and giving us some transplant education, and a lot of connecting with other transplant recipients and caregivers and donor families. So if you're in the Houston area and you want to attend, you can get more information on our website at www.pretopost.org. And you can sign up to come, and we have a schedule of the whole day on the website so you can see what we're doing. So it's going to be so much fun. I can't wait. So anyway, I don't want to waste too much more time. So let's go ahead and jump into this episode. I am just going to pick up right where we left off in our conversation. And if you didn't hear the first part one, make sure you go back and listen to part one first, because if you don't, you're going to be a little bit confused. Nancy Lewis is on talking about her double lung transplant and all of the challenges and hurdles that she had to cross before she was able to start living her new second chance and out there living her best life. So tune in to part one and then continue on with this episode in part two. So let's go ahead and help me welcome again, Nancy Lewis. Were you afraid that it wasn't going to happen again?
Well, I don't actually remember anything beyond really calling my husband and saying, they're early, I'm going in now. They're never early, I got to go, and giving the nurse all my stuff. And I don't even remember being wheeled down the hall or the anesthesia or anything.
Yeah.
That's all gone from my mind. So I don't know. I mean, I've heard of people getting all the way in there
Yeah.
on the table and then them going, nope. So I guess because they had said, we want her in here right now, the lungs were good.
Yeah.
And so I had the transplant, obviously. And because of my severe congestive heart failure, basically severe right-sided heart failure, that was really the wild card. And scleroderma, some places that don't do many transplants won't take scleroderma patients, and some places won't take pulmonary hypertension because these are higher risk transplants.
Yeah.
But I had the top, the surgical lead of the program, and he takes the hard cases, and that's me. And so it was like my husband said it was about 12 hours till he heard from the surgeon. And the surgeon told him the lung transplant went really well, almost no bleeding, just like went in really easily, but the heart is going to be the issue. So I was in a coma for 8 days while they waited for my heart to remodel. So, it's all swollen because it thinks it needs to push really hard. And every time they tried to take the vent out, my heart would just go,
Yeah.
And I guess, I mean, I don't really know what happened, but my heart would race. I'd start vomiting. It was just like My husband saw it once and was terrified. So
Yeah.
finally, after 8 days, they were able to take the vent out and wake me up. So I think that's partly why I can't remember any of that other stuff. It's just like
Yeah.
crazy to think about. And so they woke me up, asked me my name, and I knew my name and where I was, and I knew where I was. And she asked me, "Do you know why you're here?" And I didn't answer her because I knew that I was supposed to get a lung transplant, but I didn't think I'd had one. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't feel any pain. I
Yeah.
didn't, and she said, "You've had a very serious operation. You've been in a coma for 8 days, and you're just beginning your recovery. Do you understand?" And I'm like, "Okay," even though I don't think I really did.
Yeah.
And then she said, "Can you move your hand?" And I couldn't move. I couldn't move at all. I had no movement. She said, "That's okay. Can you move your foot, toe, or whatever?" And I couldn't move. And I was horrified because I worked so hard to be as strong as I possibly could be.
Yeah.
And it just felt like it's all gone. Everything's gone. Everything I worked so hard for is gone. And I've made a terrible mistake.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what have I done? And she said, "It's okay, it'll come back." And I just didn't believe her at all.
Yeah.
I didn't believe her. So I just sort of like, ugh, that, I was just so overwhelmed and freaked out. I just went back to sleep. And my husband tells me he wasn't there when I first woke up, but he was in within a couple of hours. And I was awake, and I don't remember this, but he was talking to me, and I asked him, "Why am I here?" He said, "You had a transplant, a lung transplant." And I'm like, "Really?" It was just so unbelievable. I couldn't grasp it. So I had this huge, that huge bank of stuff behind me
Right.
beeping, and
Right.
and I had a bag of fentanyl and a bag of propofol dripping in, drip, 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 which explains why I felt no pain,
Yeah.
and also why I was so discombobulated, just
Yeah.
so confused about what was going on. So, so I had learned all those years of being sick, and especially the last few years, how to live my life a day at a time. And that's what I continued to do here. So she'd say, "Can you move your hand?" Nothing. "Can you move your foot?" Nothing. And then one day I twitched my finger. Probably it was just a couple of days. I don't really know because everything was just so
Yeah.
garbled.
Yeah.
Um, so I moved my finger a little bit, and she goes, "Wow, great, good work." And I'm like, "Okay, there's hope.
Yeah.
I have hope here. I'm going to focus on my recovery, and that's everything is going to go there. Like, that's all I can, maybe I can recover.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to focus on. Then that's all I'm going to think about." So, in the end, I was in the hospital for a month because when I woke up after those 8 days, I couldn't move at all. So, obviously, I had to learn everything.
Yeah.
I had to learn how to walk and, well, move at all, let alone walk, and, stand up, and just, I could talk, although, so I guess I was probably in ICU for several days, and I had some kind of attack there during the coma. I don't know what it was, but so there was a big setback there. So they kept me there. And then I went to step down, and then I had some kind of big setback in step down. I think I had a lung infection. So I was back up in the ICU, and I was woken up when I woke up. Well, when they wake you up, when they woke me up, the doctor said, "You've had a tracheotomy to help you breathe. You've had a setback." So then I couldn't talk after that. But and then a little bit later, I was back down to step down, and I'm just focusing on anything that I can possibly do in that moment to get through that moment and recover. And I'm not one of those people to go like, "Oh, why me? And this is so horrible. And oh my God, what's going to happen?" I'm just like, focus on the focus on the future and focus on
Yeah.
the improvements and
Yeah.
focus on what you can control, which was not a hell of a whole lot at that point.
Right. When you were
So
laying there and you couldn't move, was there a reason for that? Is that something that happens when you're in a coma for a while, or was it something related to your transplant?
it's because I was out for so long and I didn't use my muscles. So I've heard some statistic, I don't remember what it is, but like every day in a coma is like, because you don't move at all, is
Yeah.
like a week of not exercising. Your muscles just waste away
Yeah.
because you're not using anything at all.
Yeah.
So 8 days it's like, well, I don't know, lying in bed for 2 months and doing nothing. Your muscles just waste away. They go away. Someone compared it to me, one of the physical therapists compared it to a forest fire. A forest fire rips through there and takes everything down, and it takes years for it to grow back up.
Yeah.
That muscle that I built up, such as it was, uh, took me a long time to build up, and it just disappears so fast because you're not using anything at all.
Yeah.
So it wasn't anything about the transplant. It was
Yeah.
about the coma.
Yeah.
It was about the coma. How long were you out after your transplant?
I woke up the next morning.
Yeah,
Um,
lucky
so
you.
yeah, I was very lucky. I didn't have a lot of setbacks and I was only in the hospital for 11 days, so I was very blessed and very lucky. I was only on
Yeah,
the
my
list for 5 days, so like
wow.
my journey is a lot easier than some people have had, and I feel very
Yeah,
lucky and blessed for that.
yeah. I know that it's like that for some people, and the doctors have told me, look, you know, uh, you've got heart failure. It's going to take a long time for you to recover, but still, I hoped. I read about people and they're awake the next day and they're walking on the first day and
Yeah.
they're home within a week or 10 days. I'm like, maybe that'll be
Yeah.
me. No, they were
Yeah.
right. I was wrong.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I just like, so I had to learn everything. I had to start to build up my muscles. And at the beginning, I was just so weak. Like the nurses would have to, when I first started walking, which wasn't for a couple of weeks, they had to haul me up and help me sit up. And I walked on one of those big standing walkers where you put your arms up on top of it
Yeah.
so that you don't have to support yourself. And they put me on the walker and then I kind of shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. It was just astounding how weak I was. I had nothing,
Yeah.
no muscles at all. But like, and often I would, like, I did want to recover, but I was really scared. I was scared of falling. And um, sometimes they'd want me to go and I wouldn't want to go, or they tried to get me on, after a while, onto a regular walker, a low walker. But the first time I went on, I had no I had no core strength and no real strength in my legs, and I just waved like a it was like a seaweed or something,
Yeah.
like, and it was terrifying to me. So then I wouldn't go in it again for several days. They're like, try it again, and I'm like, no, no, I don't want to. I'm scared. But then when I tried it again, I was fine, and I could support myself, and I could walk, and I remember the day that I suddenly could stand up by myself. Like they'd always been helping me up, and one day I just stood up. Like, so in the end, all the work I did pay off, and I was able to come back fairly quickly, but
Yeah.
it just wasn't there at my fingertips at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, laying
So
in a coma for 8 days, I imagine. Like I remember I was pretty strong. I didn't listen to everybody. I didn't exercise before, I didn't think I needed to, but I was still fairly strong. I wasn't frail. I was still, before I went in, I was still out going about my day. I was sick and I couldn't breathe, but I was still able to just, you know, go out and live normally. And I went in for my transplant, and like I said, I woke up the next day, and the day after that, they got me up to start walking, and I remember that my legs were so weak. I could still walk on them, but I couldn't believe how weak my legs had deteriorated in that one day. And I remember thinking, wow, I should have really been exercising like they all said to. But
Yeah.
being in a coma for 8 days, especially if you're already kind of frail and having a hard time exercising, I can't imagine how difficult it was to walk or to move around after you woke up. So it
It
probably
was,
did pay off that you were doing as little as you did before, because it probably would have taken longer.
well, I mean, I exercised to the best of my ability before, but the
Yeah.
truth was that, I was just so fatigued and weak and
Yeah.
frail that there wasn't really, like I said, I did get up to like a half hour walk a day, but it was a slow walk
Yeah.
with rests.
Yeah.
And, that's all I could manage. So it wasn't for nothing because it did come back fairly quickly. But, it was at the time, it just felt so long. So I was in the hospital for a month. So the first week in a coma, and then 3 weeks just kind of trying to get to a point where I could eat because I had a trach right in my throat. So I was taking nutrition and medication through the
Yeah.
nasogastric tube. Um, so I'd had the vent in for 8 days. So, my swallowing was quite compromised.
Yeah.
Some people have paralyzed vocal cords and stuff. Um, so I had a lot of function that I needed to get back before I could even go to rehab. Like I had to be able to eat. I had to be able to take my medications, most of them orally. So that meant swallowing pills. And, I needed to be able to get to the bathroom, at least with a walker, and use a toilet. And so I had a long way to go. But then so while I was in there, like I sort of had a vague idea what all these steps were. And I would just like, this is my goal. I want to be able to walk. I want to be able to walk. And at the beginning, the first time I walked, I think I walked 30 meters, so
Hmm.
90 feet. Not
Yeah.
far, not
Yeah.
far at all. Um, so it's like, whoa, okay, well, it's a start. And let's see if we can build it up. And um, learning to use the walker and then getting them to take the trach out. So I had the trach in for quite a while, and I kept agitating them to take it out, and they didn't want to. And I couldn't talk at first, which was really a pain because people would come and visit me. I think I said I had some infection in the ICU, and then I had the lung infection and step down, and then I got a blood infection. So when I first got to the regular ward, and then I just developed a blood infection, sepsis suddenly. They don't know from where. So whoop, back up to step down, and my husband was really terrified that I was going to die because he saw two of these setbacks happen right in front of his eyes, and it's so terrifying. And I wasn't really aware of it. Like
Yeah.
I remember when I got the sepsis, I remember there was a day nurse. It was like my first morning in the regular transplant ward. And she was getting my pills ready, and I'd been talking to her. And then suddenly I'm like shivering violently, and my vision goes black. And she takes my oxygen. It's in the 80s and it won't come up, and my heart is racing. And then that's all I really remember about that. So they whoosh me back. And my husband had just come in the room when this was happening. So my heart is racing. I'm falling unconscious. I'm vomiting. Like, poor guy. And like, all I remember from that day is that, like shaking. And I kept saying, I'm fine, I'm fine, even though it's obvious I wasn't fine.
Yeah.
And then I remember lying in the bed and peeing my diaper, which was like a comforting, like infantile feeling. And that's all I remember from that day.
Yeah.
Next day, I felt a lot better. They had me on antibiotics, obviously, and but he's just thinking I'm dying every time this happens.
Yeah.
So he was really terrified. It was so much worse for him than me because I'm kind of all I can deal with is what's right exactly in front of me.
Yeah.
Like I can't even I didn't even know that I'd really had three setbacks. Like I just didn't have any consciousness of this stuff. So he was terrified, poor guy. I think that whole period was much harder for him than me because
Yeah.
I just focused on what's in front of me and
Yeah.
what I can do. Oh,
Yeah.
I really,
I'm sure it's hard on the caregivers and the loved ones because they all they can do is watch. They can't help you really other than, emotional comfort. But I'm sure it's hard on them because they want to do something, but they just can't, you know.
yeah.
Yeah.
So all he could do is come and visit me. And luckily we live in Toronto and I had it in Toronto. So our house is about 40 minutes away. So we
Yeah.
didn't have to move. And
Yeah.
he would come 2 or 3 times a day, I think just to reassure himself that I was still alive,
Yeah.
just to see me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and he was still working. And I'm like, why are you coming here to see me for 5 minutes? Oh, it's okay. Just wanted to stop in.
Yeah.
And you need to take care of yourself. You need to rest because as time went by, he got poor guy. He just got more and more tired looking.
Yeah.
He's these bags under his eyes, and didn't get his hair cut, and he was just looking to my eyes really pretty shattered, but he'd smile and he wouldn't say
Yeah.
anything about his fears or anything. And he called my stepmother to come up from California to visit me. And I'm like, oh, what are you doing here? Nice to see you. Well, I couldn't talk then, but you know, yeah, those are very hard times for him. For me, I'm just like, hey, cool, I can stand up today.
Yeah.
Ooh, they're gonna put a cap on my trach so I can talk.
Yeah.
That's great. Wow. So I can, talk finally again and just instead of just lying there like a mute. I hated that.
Yeah.
That was very frustrating for me. Um, so like, and so I had these goals, I want to stand up, I want to walk. I would love to get rid of this diaper if I could use a toilet. That would be awesome because I couldn't walk, so I was in a diaper for weeks.
Yeah.
Um, and then they get me up and use a commode. So it's a little toilet seat on wheels, and they bring it.
Yeah.
It's got a plastic bag, and you do your business in there. But it means you're sitting in a dirty diaper until they really come
Yeah.
and clean you up. And I mean, by this point, I had no pride,
Yeah.
right? It's like, whatever. Everybody look at my dirty ass. I don't care. Like,
Yeah.
whatever. I depend on other people for everything at that point, but it'd be nice not to have to. So, working towards those goals, swallowing was a big one. Um, so I got the trach capped and I really wanted the trach out and I kept bugging them. When do I get the trach out? And well, we'll try capping it for a few hours and see how you feel. They come back in a few hours. How do you feel? Great. Okay, we're going to take it out. So next day they put it in. She comes back at the end of the day. And I'm like, when can I get that out? And she said, when you can tolerate it for a couple of days, we'll take it out. So I convinced her like, not to take the cap off. That's what they were worried about. Can I tolerate it? Yes, I can tolerate it. Leave it in. Just trying to push them to
Yeah.
get things done that will move me closer to my goal of ultimately going home. And there was a guy in the next bed to me. So it was very crowded in the transplant ward, and the healthcare human resources were really stretched post COVID. So they would often put us two in a room, man and a woman, which they wouldn't have done in other times. So there was a man in the regular ward next to me at one point who had had a lung transplant not too long after mine. And he was just dead set on getting home. That's all he wanted, was to go home. He would, they'd tell him, don't go to the toilet by yourself. You need supervision. But he didn't listen. He'd just go. Or we were supposed to take our pills one at a time, and he would just throw them all back. Like, he wasn't listening. And they told him, you need to exercise more. And he would, honestly, he'd leave the room for like 3 minutes, and he'd come back in, he'd walk with his wife, and he'd come back in, he'd go, oh my God, that was so exhausting. I went so far. And I'm like, no, you didn't. But he just wanted to go home. But I was like, I get it. Who doesn't want to go home? But I wanted to be strong enough to go home. So I knew that I would need to go to rehab. He just wanted to go home. So they pushed him and his wife, really pushed for him to go home. And he did go home. And I always worried about him because he wasn't really very strong. And I could just imagine him going home and sitting in his easy chair, watching TV all day, and asking his wife to, bring him whatever. Like, I wasn't going to be that person. I needed to get strong. So eventually I did get the trach out. And even before they took it out, is this true? At some point, they started doing swallowing tests to see how well I could swallow. So they take films of me swallowing things, try water, try ice, try moistened bread, whatever the hell it was. And because I hadn't swallowed in a long time, and because I'd had the vent in for so long, I wasn't really swallowing very well. So I had to learn how to swallow. So, they start you, you see in the movies where people take pills and they throw their heads back and swallow.
Yeah.
Not how you're supposed to swallow. I learned. You, put your chin down a bit and swallow, and sort of swallow from there. You don't throw your head back. And that way it's much easier, and take small swallows and try to get things down that way.
Yeah.
So I had to start, and I would take things by teaspoons, so a teaspoon at a time. So I must have had the trach out, I guess. But I still had the nasogastric tube, and they wouldn't take that out until they saw that I could swallow and eat. So I started with like yogurt and blended soups, and I would eat them like by teaspoon, with swallowing the way I'd been taught, taking sips of liquid. And it was really exciting at first because I hadn't had food for like 3 weeks, so I could taste food. That was awesome. But then I got that same damn blended soup twice a day and yogurt in the morning. It was like, getting pretty tired of this soup, right? I want to go on to real food. So then they started giving me meal trays, and they had to track how much I was eating to make sure that I could get enough calories in so they could take the nasogastric tube out. So I ate a lot because it tasted good, because I hadn't tasted food. I never thought hospital food could taste that good. And before my transplant, I was on a low sodium diet because that exacerbates the heart failure. So I was used to eating unsalted food, and this food was like salty, so delicious.
Yeah.
And it was what they called they have several categories of food depending on how you can eat. So I was on what they called a minced moist diet. So scleroderma can really affect your swallowing ability. We know that I have no motility through my throat. That's just very common with scleroderma. And so it takes a bit of work to be able to swallow food, and you need some liquid with your food. And if it's stuff like, let's say, a crusty bread or a big piece of beef, I can't swallow it. I haven't been able to for quite a few years. So, like, to have this soft, moist, salty food, it was
Yeah.
like heaven. I loved it.
Yeah.
And
I'm
my
sure.
husband would watch me eat because I really didn't have much appetite before the transplant. And he would watch me in amazement and I'd like polish off the whole tray. He's like, he hadn't seen me eat that much food in years.
Yeah.
And I was super, super thin before the transplant. And then I lost even more weight when I was just, getting goo through my nose. So I needed to gain weight. So they were giving me lots of food and I would just eat it all. I was hungry. It was delicious. I was really happy. So they
Yeah.
were like, okay, she's going to get her calories. Don't worry about it. So they took the tube out. But the day before they took the tube out, I accidentally pulled it out of my nose. I don't know how I did it, but I was doing something and suddenly there it was in my hand. And I'm like, oh, God. So I called the nurse and she said, well, I have to put it back in because we're not scheduled to take it out, the nasogastric tube out till tomorrow. And so I need to put it back in for a day to make sure because that's where you're getting most of your nutrition. She's like, I'm sorry, this is really going to be unpleasant. It's going to be awful. And, like, sure, it's yucky, but I just had a lung transplant. Like, it's nothing. They stick a tube down my nose.
Well,
Yeah,
couldn't they
okay.
just go ask the doctor, it's scheduled for tomorrow, but it's already out. Maybe we could just, make
I
it
don't know.
today.
It didn't seem like that was a possibility for whatever reason. I don't
Mm.
really remember. But so they had to put it in, and then the next day could have had something to do. I don't know. I didn't try to argue with them too much. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, whatever. Anyway, so finally it was out and I was eating and I was up and I was like able to take the walker in to use the toilet. And, I was starting to swallow my pills. They would often cut them up and then I had to take them with thickened liquid, but I could get them down. So it's like ticking off all the goals towards uh actually the other thing I forgot to mention was that, so when you've had a transplant, you've got all this stuff in your body and drainage tubes and all this stuff.
Right.
And within less than 2 weeks after the actual transplant, I still had cannula in my nose, and just in case, I guess. And I was on 1.5 or 2 liters of oxygen. And one day, one of my nurses said to me, "How much oxygen are you on?" I said, 1.5, I think, but I don't think I really need it. And he said, I agree. And he just took it out of my nose. And so, like, I've used supplemental oxygen for over 3 years that I needed. I couldn't
Yeah.
survive without it. And suddenly it's gone.
Yeah.
Like 2 weeks. My lungs were removed from my body, and somebody else's lungs were put into my body, and they worked perfectly. They
Yeah.
worked perfectly. I could breathe, no problem. We checked my oxygen. It's like 98. It was often 100 when they'd
Yeah.
come and they'd take my oxygen. And I'd go, can you just leave it on for a minute? Because it was so incredible to see.
Yeah.
It's like I struggled to keep myself in the mid 90s before.
Yeah.
That's, like amazing. And the nurses would take my heart rate and my blood pressure and everything, and they were normal. They haven't been
Yeah.
normal for years.
Yeah.
Years.
I remember that too. I remember seeing those numbers. And then, for the few months after transplant, you go to the doctor every week. And I remember my SAT was always 97, 98, and one day it was 95. And I was like so disappointed. I was like, I can't believe my SAT's 95. And my husband was like, are you kidding me right now? And of course it went back up, but
Yeah.
I was like disappointed at 95. But
Mine was,
before I would have killed for 95. Like
of
I was
course.
always like very low 90s, sometimes 88, 87. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know. But it's just so miraculous that, like, what a drastic, crazy drastic operation to have.
Yeah.
And, I remember meeting one of my other friends afterwards, and he says, "Don't you think it's? Do you think about having someone else's lungs in your body?" I mean, sort of, I do, but I don't. They just fit right in there.
Yeah.
They just melded right into my body, and they supported everything about my body. Everything got better, like
Yeah.
including my whole attitude towards life. Like
Yeah.
when I was younger, I could be a bit of a negative person, shall we say.
Yeah.
Um, and I kind of got over that during my illness, but like such gratitude and joy every day, you know?
Yeah.
So amazing to be alive. So I after about a month I was discharged to rehab. So the rehab facility is right across the road. It's an affiliated hospital. So I went over there and I started in on rehab because where I was in the transplant ward was very busy and there's lots of people there, and all the transplants go through there. So it's a super busy ward and everybody's very busy. So the rehab facility where I was originally to stay 2 to 3 weeks and ended up staying a month there was much quieter and calmer, and I just got focused attention. So I would do like 45 minutes to an hour of rehab every day and 45 minutes to an hour of occupational therapy every weekday. Plus, I was in the beginning, so they start you off in what they call like you get a red tag, which means you need assistance at all times to do anything to get out of your bed. And then you graduate to yellow, which means you need observation, but you don't need assistance. So if you have to go to the toilet, you ring and someone will come and watch you, but they don't help you do stuff. And then you graduate to green, and then you can do whatever you want. You can walk around the ward freely.
Yeah.
So I was red for a couple of days and then yellow for maybe a week or so, and then I was green. So that was awesome because then I could just get on that walker and walk around the ward by myself several times a day, which I hadn't been allowed to until then. And again, right? Like people, I mean, they're all here in rehab just like me, but most people, I don't see people out there doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm out there in the evening walking laps around the ward, and all the staff are giving me the thumbs up and good for you.
Yeah.
And other people are lying in their rooms and talking or whatever. Like, I just, it's strange to me that people, I was pretty compliant with what I knew I needed to do.
Yeah.
And I pushed myself to do the things that I needed to do. And other people didn't do that so much. It was kind of strange to me.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think
So,
I think a
yeah,
lot of people, they I think it's a mindset thing. You have to
yeah,
have that attitude of, I'm gonna get up, I'm gonna get out of here. And sometimes I think people have a hard time dealing with what they're going through, and maybe they just don't have that attitude. They don't have that positivity. And sometimes
yes,
it's
totally.
hard to have that.
And people talk about feeling like survivor guilt,
Yeah.
which always seemed kind of weird to me because it's not like somebody died, obviously, and
Yeah.
chances are pretty good that it was a young person who died in good health who died suddenly. I mean, you don't
Yeah.
plan for these things, and but they didn't do it for me,
Yeah.
and it's really quite beautiful in a way, horrible. Like on one side of it, it's horrible, but on the other side of it, their life after it was lost went to help other people live. And
Yeah.
that's quite beautiful to me. Like it's a beautiful cycle of life.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of death and I'm not afraid of dying myself. I've seen people close to me, my mother, for example, die, and it's horrible and it's sad, but isn't it nice to think that that fed back into a circle of life that gave other me and maybe lots of other people potentially life? So I never felt guilty. I did feel sad, and I know what it's like to lose a loved one, and I'm so grateful that somebody in their most potentially the worst day of their lives made that decision.
Yeah.
It's such an unselfish decision, and it allowed me to live, and like I'm forever grateful, but I don't feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
I'm grateful because I know that lung transplants haven't really been performed for that long. Like
Yeah.
within my lifetime, the first successful lung transplant was done. So
Yeah.
like how lucky am I that out of my crap luck of getting this disease for no apparent reason, that I was here in Toronto and able to be transplanted here in this program and to have survived that dreadful surgery. And, I lived many years when I was younger abroad. I lived for many years in Thailand in particular. And I often think, if I had been a poor Thai person with the things that I have, I'd be dead
Yeah.
years ago. Like,
Yeah.
they don't survive these things, but I survived it. It's amazing. So a lot of people feel guilty and they kind of, it's almost like they torture themselves, but there's nothing to feel guilty about. Feel joy and gratitude and happiness, in my opinion. That's how
Yeah.
I look at it anyway. A
Yeah.
lot of it is attitudinal. I do believe that's really true.
Yeah, for sure.
So eventually, I came home. I came home and it was just so beautiful to be out of the hospital and no longer be regimented through my days by all these schedules and blood tests, and we got to weigh you and we got to do this and we got to do that. It's like
Yeah.
I had two cats. We have two cats, and I saw my cats finally for the first time in 2 months. And they didn't really weren't totally sure who I was. But the brave one, she kept looking around the corner and then running away when I'd look at her. And I kept talking to her. And pretty soon she came over. And then the scaredy one sort of finally came in and sat at a safe distance and looked at me. And, it was just like, it was September. So that was really nice because the weather was beautiful.
Yeah.
And we have a nice little house in the suburbs, and there were birds and squirrels and breezes and flowers, and nobody was trying to get me to do anything. I could just relax.
Yeah.
And when we went to bed that night, my husband and I, and of course, we're just like, I'm so happy to be home. And he's like, I'm so happy you're here. And the cats, normally one of them would sleep with us. They sort of switch back and forth. They both, for the very first time, both climbed on the bed and slept with us that night. And it was
Yeah.
just so comforting
Yeah.
to be back in my home. So then I had to, get stronger. I was scared to walk outside.
Yeah.
I hadn't really gone out very much myself alone even before because I had this tank and, the weather had to be perfect and I don't drive.
Yeah.
So I was really scared after that I was going to fall because, as you know, it's more challenging to walk outside than inside. The pavements and
Right.
people and
Right.
everything. So I didn't want to go out by myself. So finally, I went out with my husband and we went for a walk. And then my stepmother came and stayed with us for weeks. So she helped with cooking and just took me out for a walk every day because my husband was still working. And gradually built up my strength. And in those days, yeah, I was going to the hospital like a couple of times a week, doing physio and getting blood tests and seeing the doctor and like lots of stuff going on. And at 3 months, I had mild acute rejection. Not uncommon, but rejection, you go,
Yeah.
Oh my God. So that was big bolus of um, steroids, which took care of that, no problem. And then at 5 months, I got COVID, which was really scary. And I'd never had COVID before. I'd managed to avoid it through the
Yeah.
whole thing. So I got COVID, but luckily it was mild. I knew right away that I had something wrong. So my husband took the COVID test first and he was positive, and then it takes a couple of days for it to show up. And then I started getting symptoms and I took the test and it was positive. So I
Yeah.
got in touch with my team right away and took remdesivir infusions for 3 days. And it was very mild, no lasting effects at all. So, whew,
You're very lucky,
yeah, I
especially
was really,
having a transplant so soon after.
I know.
Yeah.
I had gone the month before and had the latest inoculation, like vaccination, and they felt that was probably the two reasons why it was mild was probably because I'd had the vaccination just a month before, and
Yeah.
because I got in touch with them right away and
Yeah.
started the treatments. Because, as you know, people can require transplants after COVID. Like,
Yeah.
it's scary business.
It's scary
So,
even now, like as a
yes,
recipient. I got COVID. It had already calmed down. I was 3.5 years out, I think, maybe four, and it must have been 3.5. And I was, they had already gotten over the hard COVID. They were into this new strand, and it wasn't really,
yeah,
you know, causing so many deaths. But I was terrified that it's so scary. COVID is still so scary.
yes.
Yeah,
Do you get vaccinated?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And I had been vaccinated, but I still caught it. My husband caught it and brought it home to me, like you.
yeah.
So
Same for me. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
so
So I got that, and then at 1 year, I was diagnosed with a fungal infection in my lungs, which was pretty scary to me. Um, and, it just kind of underlined what they say that, you're more vulnerable than other people because the one I got was a type of aspergillus, which is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's indoors, it's
yeah,
outdoors. You can't avoid it. So there's nothing I could have done to, not get it. It's just there.
yeah,
Um, so that was pretty scary to me. And I got put on antifungals and, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months finally. So this was just recently. They said, yep, it's gone. You can stop taking the meds. So, so I like when I write every month on my Facebook page when a 1 month anniversary comes in 18 months. And I'm like, okay, well, I had 3 setbacks in hospital. I was in there for 2 months. I was home. I had rejection. I had COVID. I had a fungal infection. But you know what? I'm okay. I'm
yeah,
still okay.
yeah,
And I feel better all the time. Like it's not huge. And I don't know that I will ever feel like I used to feel. But to be fair, I'm 63. So nobody feels at 63 like
right,
they felt when they were 30.
right,
And I got sick when I was in my 40s. So I've been sick for a very long time. So do I feel back to normal? No, I don't really know what normal feels like anymore, to be honest.
yeah,
But do I feel good? Yes,
yes,
I feel good. And I feel like I don't get better by leaps and bounds, but for sure I get better. Every day I get just a little bit better.
yeah,
And feels, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
yeah,
Like to just get a little bit better, a little bit better. So, you asked me early on, very early on in this, do you feel like you're back to normal? Well, the answer is I don't know, because I don't know what normal feels like.
right,
Um, do I feel better? Absolutely. I feel
yeah,
so much better than I felt. And do I have any regrets about that transplant that I was so scared of and thought I was going to refuse? No way.
yeah,
I'm so glad I did it. It's just like you know, I can't even, well, I would be dead, I think,
Right.
because they're not going to transplant you if they don't think you will last very long,
Yeah.
without it. I would be dead. And I'm not dead. I'm doing well. And like I said, I'm actually starting to think, well, okay, I've got 18 months. Now we're going for 2 years. And,
Yeah.
I told my respirologist early on, I'm going to go for a year. Like, that's going to be my goal. Once I get to a year, then 5 years. And he's like, you go. So I'm
Yeah.
going. It's like amazing,
Yeah.
amazing, amazing.
Well, they always say that the first years, once you get past the first year, then it's a little easier after that. And
Yeah.
I think that you have an incredible story that shows that because you had your transplant and you had all these, I call them aftershocks, right? So the transplants, the
Yeah.
earthquake, and then you have some aftershocks after, and you had many of those and you overcame them, and now you're doing fantastic. You went from being in a coma for 8 days, not being able to move, to now, out there living your best life and doing fantastic. And I think that your story is incredible, and it shows people that transplant is hard and you have to work hard at it. And you might go through some setbacks or aftershocks and challenges, but you can come out the end doing amazingly like you do. So my story is simple. My story was easy. My journey is like I had my transplant, I did fantastic. But when I have people on my show that have a story like this, I like hearing those ones because it just
Yeah.
shows, what you can. It might be hard and you might have challenges, but you'll come out stronger at the end. So I think your story is fantastic.
You have to believe and you have to push and don't look back
Yeah.
and don't look except to go, wow, I can stand today. And don't look too far forward
Yeah.
and and
One day at a time.
one day at a time, absolutely. And enjoy every day.
So since we're talking about that, let me ask you my last question that I ask
Yeah.
all my recipients. And I've been looking forward to asking you this question. So you had the mindset of, I'm not gonna get a transplant. I don't want to go there. So I want to know what piece of advice that you would have for somebody who is pre-transplant thinking those same things that you wish that you had known when you were in that position. What would you say to them?
Really try to educate yourself as best you can so that you understand what you're facing because it is not for the faint of heart, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But but I knew that, and I knew that I might die before I get my transplant, or I could die on the table, although that's pretty rare, or
Mhm.
die in the hospital, although that's pretty rare too. Um, or soon after, so that you're prepared for what you might face. I in the end, I entered the transplant with what I call clear-eyed optimism. Like, I was always tried to be optimistic that I'm going to survive this. Once I understood really what it was and how um how good, relatively speaking, my chances were, but at the same time I'm clear-eyed. I might not make it, and I'm okay with that. Like, I'm okay if I don't make it, but I'm really optimistic that I will make it, and I did. So, and it was really educating myself about this whole process that made me adopt that attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah, the big turning point for me was talking to the transplant physician and hearing the statistics. I'm not super great with numbers, but I'm aware enough of statistics to know that those are good odds. My
Yeah.
mother, when she first had a mastectomy, which is when they discovered the breast cancer, they said 50% chance of being alive in 5 years. Well, my odds were much better than hers, you know,
Yeah.
statistically speaking. I mean, you might be an outlier on any side, but these are sort of, and I guess I know, unlike a lot of people say, I heard the survival's 5 years. I'm on 5 years. I'm not ready to die. It's like, that's not what a statistic is. That's
Yeah.
not what it's telling you. Half of people live less and half of people live more. That's what an average is.
Yeah.
So go for the more side.
Yeah.
Just like, be prepared, but be optimistic. That's what totally turned it around for me.
Yeah. That's great. That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming here and sharing your incredible journey. And I wish you the best. And I wish that you have the longest life and you get to do all the greatest things that you want to do.
Thank you. I wish the same for all of us who've
Yes.
been on these journeys.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Have a wonderful day.
You too. And don't forget
Thanks for
to.
talking.
Oh, you're welcome. And thanks for coming on the show. Thank you for listening to the Pre to Post Transplant Podcast. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook. Oh, and if you have not signed up to be an organ donor, please visit www.organdonor.gov and register today. You too can save lives.